Behind every success story, there is a long line of triumphs and defeats that remain hidden from others. These stories get condensed into journeys that minimize the struggle and wrap up with a happy ending. But we know that's not how life works. That's where From the Ashes with Mark Azoulay comes in. On today's show, you'll hear honest conversations about the challenges that Mark's guest faced and how they overcame adversity. Now, here is your host, Mark Azoulay.
Welcome back to From the Ashes. I'm your host, Mark Azoulay, and I'm sitting here with Michelle Elman, the upcoming author of the book, The Joy of Being Selfish. So, Michelle, I was looking at your website, and you got some real intense topics that I can't wait to dive into. You wrote another book called Am I Ugly? You have a TEDx of, let's see, have you hated your body enough today? I mean, there's a lot going on there. I can't wait to hear more about your story.
I didn't quite realize how many clickbait titles I use, but yeah, they are quite intense titles, and the topics, I guess I don't really shy away from the taboo topics. I think for me, it's always been more interesting to talk about something that no one else is talking about. And I don't really have a lot of shame or stigma that we get brought up with, whether it's body image or boundaries or even just emotions. Sometimes we stigmatize that and don't let people talk about their feelings or even just things like crying. All of those topics have been always most interesting to me. And I don't really know where that came from, other than the fact that I think inherently we just have certain interests. And for me, it's always been how people think, how people communicate with each other, and ultimately emotions and feelings, which is what landed me doing life coaching.
I think that's awesome. I mean, it's really courageous to get out there and just like look at these demons in the eyes and look at it face on and start to talk for so much just hidden shame that people carry around all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where my shame started was that I had a lot of surgeries when I was 15 years old, and I actually was completely the opposite to everything I just said, in that I didn't talk about any of the surgeries until I was 21. So bearing in mind, I started having those surgeries when I was 1 year old. I had 15 surgeries before the age of 19. You wouldn't have known, because I never wanted to show my scars. I never wanted to talk about them. Even my best friends, most of them didn't know I had surgeries. And I would just go into hospital discreetly and come out of hospital, be missing from school for a few days. And that silence definitely bred shame. And I think a big piece of, especially my body image work in the past, was showing that actually if we don't talk about it, you feel like you're the only person in the world and you're never alone going through what you're going through. And it was only from almost like a factual standpoint that I started wondering when I was like 20 years old, I can't be the only one with surgery scars. So why do we never hear about it? And so that's when I was like, you know what? I'm confident now. I can talk about this. If I want someone to be talking about it, why not me? And that's where my first book and the start of my life coaching journey, I guess, began.
That's fantastic. So on this show, I want to hear a lot more about that, right? I want to hear about that personal surgery piece. So if you could kind of extend that out for our listeners, I'm curious a couple things. One, what the condition was, if you're willing to share that online, that resulted in the surgeries. And then also how you were making sense over that, first 20 years of your life. Did it change? Did your relationship change and evolve, or what was it like? Yeah, give us the rundown.
I've had 15 surgeries from a brain tumor, a punctured intestine, a cyst in my brain, a obstructed bowel. I'm going to forget something. Pretty much every organ that you can be operated on, I've ticked that box. And a lot of people are like, well, why? Or what's the cause of it? There isn't always a cause to it. Some people are just unlucky with health. And I was unlucky. Like within a year, I think I'd had 3 surgeries in my first year of life. And it was just one thing after another. And and I have a condition called hydrocephalus, which means you have too much water in your brain. And I think I struggled to make sense of it, because the problem with going through those issues when you are at the ages I was at was you don't have the language for it. Most adults don't have the language for it, let alone when you actually don't have the language for it, because you're still learning how to talk, to speak, to communicate pain. And so it was kind of this I guess I was very much brought up with you are no different to your brother. My brother's less than a year older than me. And so he's never had a health problem in his life. And so my parents always brought me up with the idea that I can do anything I want, anything I put my mind to, I'm no different. Um, and I guess the flip side of that was I never took a moment long enough to appreciate that what I did go through was actually a big deal. And it all kind of came crashing down when I was 19 years old, in my final year of university. And I got diagnosed with PTSD, and essentially it was all those secrets I was keeping inside me, all the things that I was pushing down in order to come across as normal or not different was the goal. I think sometimes in schools, especially, you want to conform, you don't want to stand out. And so I think that was my worst fear, was standing out and being different. And different is not a bad thing, but at that age, I thought it was.
Yeah, what did you think that people would judge you for or say? What would happen if they found out these secrets that you were holding?
Well, I think it stemmed from when I was 10 years old. I think there's a point where you're not actually very conscious of your body as a child.
Hmm.
So you see the differences, but you don't really think one is better than the other. And so obviously I'd seen my brother's stomach when like we had baths or whatever. I've seen my parents' stomach. I didn't notice. I Of course I knew I had scars on my stomach. I just didn't really clock it as a thing that, in the same way people have blue eyes and brown eyes. And then I went to a birthday party where um, I wanted to wear a bikini for the first time, and I came out, and when I came out, it wasn't just like my friends, it was the parents who looked at my scars with like shock and pity and
Oh, yeah.
honest horror at some points. And I think for me the worst one was pity, was because like I didn't even really have the word for pity, but I just knew it made me feel bad. So I think it was from that moment forward I was just like, yeah, this is something that makes something people uncomfortable. Let's not talk about it. Whereas I was too young to know actually that's their discomfort. That belongs to them. It has nothing to do with me.
Absolutely, right? You can't control other people's reactions.
Exactly.
So you're saying in your 20s you got diagnosed with PTSD, then you started to work on this. Did you seek therapy or get into any kind of program, or was it self-taught? How did you start to overcome some of this PTSD and shame you were carrying around?
So I was always intending to go into the psychology field. So I was doing a degree in psychology and I was intending to be a psychologist.
Hmm.
So in my final year, I went to therapy and I started unpicking some of it, but I found that talking therapy wasn't working for me. It's a great approach and it works for many, many people in the world. For me, it felt quite limited. Past the cathartic talking about it for the
Hmm.
first time in my life, I didn't find it was helping any of my symptoms or relieving any of the feelings I had. And so I started searching for other approaches. Just from a curiosity standpoint, I found hypnotherapy and just thought it was like sounded interesting. And through that, I actually found neurolinguistic programming and something called havening, and all the things that have now led to life coaching. I use life coach as an umbrella term, but underneath it, all the techniques and the models that I use are neurolinguistic programming, timeline therapy, parts of hypnotherapy, and the thing that specifically helped me the most was havening, which is a form of hypnotherapy but works on the idea that trauma occurs when you're unable to escape a situation, and therefore you don't need to relive it, because when you're doing talking therapy you're actually strengthening those neural pathways, and instead you need to actually break that pathway by interrupting it. And it makes for quite a funny thing to watch as an observer, because it's things like singing happy birthday when you're thinking of the memory, but it means that your neural pathway can't run in the same way and you disrupt that pattern. And that's how your body unlearns that, oh, you're not reliving the situation, it's not happening to you again. Because I think it's really important to understand that our unconscious mind and our conscious mind don't know the difference. So if I started talking about biting into a lemon, your mouth would start salivating, at least mine is, and that's because the lemon doesn't need to be there for your body to react to it. So in the same way, when I started thinking about all of these past memories, all these past surgeries, my body was reacting to that
Hmm.
too.
Right. So this havening practice sounds like it really helped you to short circuit that trauma thing that was happening so that you could be more present in the moment and move forward in your life. How did you enact that during your life? Like, did you bust out singing Happy Birthday when you would have a symptom, or would you find ways to kind of hard shift your mental state? You do any of the the priming stuff from neural linguistic
So it
programming?
was it was one session with a Havening practitioner, and I don't think I would have the confidence to do it myself. It's also a technique that you have to learn, and so yeah, it was that one session, and I think it allowed me to get enough distance from my it allowed me to get enough distance from the physical symptoms I was experiencing to actually work on the emotional stuff as well.
Okay, very cool. So you do that, and then what's the next step in your journey? Did you just start becoming a life coach then, or how did you keep moving
Uh,
forward? Yeah.
Within the next year, I trained and qualified as a life coach. It was a transformative year, to say the least.
Mhm.
And I started working with clients the following year, and it all happened quite quickly. I think when you know and approach yourself personally and can vouch for the fact that it works and have the personal experience of using it on your own issues, you are able to be more effective in the way you work with clients. And so I think it was simply that, like a lot of people focus on the fact that, especially when you talk about NLP, it's like not researched, all of these things. And frankly, when you have a client in the chair wanting help, if it works, they don't care why it works. And that was essentially what I went off. It was like, I don't care that it's not researched. It's the one thing that really helped me. And I believe in it and have been using it ever since. So it's what, 8 years now of life coaching. And yeah, we all start somewhere, and that was where my journey started. And I'm so grateful I happened to discover this other approach of helping people, because I think that was the original intention behind becoming a psychologist. Was I always wanted to help people with their emotional um issues, and also because that's always the thing that's interested me. And then I got to that roadblock where I was like, oh well, how can I be a convincing psychologist when talking therapy doesn't work for me? And then you're forced to find a different approach.
Mhm. Right. And really practicing what you preach is huge, right? Because the clients are going to pick up on that integrity. They're going to pick up with the fact that you've been down that path. And it sounds like they are drawn to you, right? It's very magnetizing to be like, okay, wow, this person really does know what they're talking about. They're not, selling something that they don't know works for themselves.
Absolutely. And to this day, I don't recommend any exercise I haven't done myself. And if I do an exercise and it doesn't work, then I don't share it. So it's quite simple in the fact that you get the best of what, when I recommend something, you get the best of the best because I've tried it all. And if it doesn't work, then I won't mention it.
So tell me more about the ambition then, right? Because you got your life coaching practice going, and then you want to step on doing TED Talks, and now you're writing books. So what kind of message do you want to get out there to people? When I think about that, I think of increasing impact and really reaching the mass market. What inspired you to do that?
Yeah, so I think for me, when I first started, it was really about staying outside my comfort zone. So around, especially the first year I started life coaching, I made myself a very simple rule that I can't say no because I'm scared. I can only say no because I actually don't want to do it, or because I physically can't do it, like timing wise. And so that meant I said yes to everything. And the point when it was challenged the most was when I was asked to give a TED talk. And I wanted to say no because I was so scared that I had told myself things like, oh, I don't. So TED Talk's really important that they emphasize one message in your talk. So you're not meant to be giving a talk with 10 messages. It just has to be very focused on one. And I told myself I didn't just have one message. And so I couldn't dilute my message down to one message. And you tell yourself all these stories, but I had this rule. So I said yes, figured it out later. And I'm so glad I did, because that evolved my public speaking. The kind of training you get when you work with TED is amazing. And it allowed me, especially within what changed most around my public speaking, was the fact that TED really taught me how important it was to emotionally connect with what you were saying. So a lot of my story is obviously very personal. And I think almost as a protection mechanism, when I would get on stage, I would say it very matter of fact. A lot of people have said when I list my surgeries, I almost list, it's as if I list my grocery list. Like it's so devoid of any emotion. And I said to them, well, I can't emotionally connect to this talk because if I do, then I will cry on stage. And they were like, cry on stage then. And so I remember the dress rehearsal. It was a 12 12-minute talk and I cried for 6 minutes of it. And at the end, I went, see, that's why I told you I can't cry. And they were like, what was wrong with that? And I was like, you couldn't even hear me for 6 minutes of it. And they were like, yeah, but on stage, you will naturally stop yourself from crying that much. But do it exactly like that. And I was like, you're joking. You want me to get on stage and cry for half the time? Of course, when I actually, and I mean, the TED Talk was 2 days later. This was the dress rehearsal. But they were right. When you're actually on stage, there are moments in my TED Talk, you can see me breaking up and tears coming into my eyes. But I never actually get to the point of bawling, because you have that awareness that 300, 600 people are watching you. And then, of course, online, there are so many more. I think it's up to 50,000 people have watched it. And so you catch yourself, you take a breath and you keep talking, but actually being able to deliver that talk with emotions is so much more impactful than this distant kind of public speaking that I was very accustomed to doing.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that. It sounds like it's so much more evocative, right? When there's emotion attached to it and people can really feel it. Because I think it's so easy to numb out from all the atrocity and awful things that happen in the world. But I think stepping into it is really charismatic and really powerful.
Absolutely. And using it.
Yeah, right. Using it to help other people and to inspire others. I'm curious. So your most recent book is about the joy of being selfish. What interests you in that topic?
Well, I just found that I worked so hard around my body image and loving my body that I got to a point where I was like, I love my body, but I'm not really sure I like myself, because there was something about the fact that I was surrounded by people who were treating me so badly that didn't quite fit in with everything else in my life. And I think there was this wake-up call where I was like, why do I have friends and the boyfriend at the time that I was with who treat me really badly? And there must be some self-esteem element underneath that. And the antidote to that was boundaries. As I said, I don't really promote anything that I haven't tried myself. And boundaries are the single most revolutionary thing I have done in my own life through life coaching.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. I can't wait to talk more about that in our next segment. So we're going to wrap up this one now, go into a commercial break. But when we come back, I want to hear more about your views on selfish. That's such a loaded word, especially for many, I think women particularly, around being selfish and not. And then about boundaries, right? I think it'd be really helpful for our listeners to get your perspective and your journey through that. So for those of you tuning in, hang on. I'll catch you on the other side of the commercial break.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
In Mark's work with high performers and business owners, it is becoming increasingly clear to him that their biggest obstacle to success is themselves. They are experts in their field, but are dragged down by their anxiety, poor time management, inability to focus, or self-sabotage. His role is to help you overcome these emotional and organizational issues so that you can truly excel in your business and your personal life. One of the most common hurdles that he sees is perfectionism, a crippling anxiety around performance. It's a fear of not being good enough, being publicly embarrassed, or of disappointing others. These fears paralyze brilliant people and bring them to their knees. This course will help you to break free from this mental prison and have more agency in your world. In this online course, we will break down the prison of perfectionism so that you can break out of it. For more information and to sign up, visit mark-azoulay.teachable.com. That's Mark, MARC-Azoulay, AZOULAY.teachable.com.
Where can you listen to some of the world's top life coaches ready to dish out success tips and entrepreneurial guidance? The Voice America Empowerment Channel will do just that. Whether it's personal growth, building a better business, or inspirational life stories, make it a daily habit to tune into our programs. From weight loss and personal branding to law of attraction and increased happiness, you'll find it every day at VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com. The Voice America Empowerment Channel. It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed.
Our thoughts and feelings not only affect our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us. Find new meanings of love, authentic expressions, and better connections with the people in your life. Tune in to Love Light with Dr. Jean Marie Farish. This program will feature guests and discuss ideas that will bring a better life to you. When you find this perspective on love, it will change everything. Listen live every Friday at 12 noon Eastern Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.
You need to live up to your full potential. You've heard that for years, but now there's a channel to help you get there. Introducing the Voice America Empowerment Channel. Our listeners have told us that they want to be motivated, hear about success stories, and positive encouragement around the clock. And we've responded to you. The Voice America Empowerment Channel is the home of the world's top life coaches, entrepreneurs, and success experts. Listen to the Voice America Empowerment Channel. It's here at VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com.
You are listening to From the Ashes with Mark Azoulay. To reach the show today, please call 1-888-346-9141. That's 1-888-346-9141. Or send an email to podcast@mark-azoulay.com. Now, back to From the Ashes.
Welcome back. I'm sitting here with Michelle Elman, the author of The Joy of Being Selfish and the self-proclaimed, or I guess follow-proclaimed, Queen of Boundaries. I want to talk more about this idea of selfish because I see it a ton in my practice, psychotherapy practice, where it's just this wall that people hit, right? I'll be like, hey, have you tried talking to this person about how you feel? Or have you tried doing this or doing that? Or, things like that. They're like, no, I don't want to be selfish. And it's just like a full e-brake stop that really paralyzes a lot of people. What was it like for you dealing with that internal voice?
Well, I just found it interesting that we're so all about self-love and self-care, and then you say selfish, and again, you hit, as you said, you hit this wall. And I think ultimately it comes down to not caring about people's opinions. And I know that's very easy to say, especially because it's actually evolutionary for us to care about people's opinions. But it's the point of the fact that when you are trying to make time for self-love and self-care, you actually have to put someone lower on your priority list in order to put yourself higher. So we can talk about the superficial stuff, we can talk about the concept of self-love and self-care, but the practical stuff is, in order for you to make time for yourself, someone else needs to have that time removed from them. And so I think it's important you talk about that side, because otherwise they get through the difficult part of being name called, either being called selfish, being called rude, arrogant for setting boundaries, and then they go, oh, why is this happening to me? You didn't prepare me for this. You just told me it was going to be a really fun, easy, joyful experience of setting boundaries, but you didn't tell me that, like, my friends might get really annoyed at me, or my family might be like, why have you changed? And all of these aspects of it that are important to talk about as well.
Yeah, so I see this show up in almost all of my female clients. And I'm wondering if in the work that you do or in your own life, if you've seen a gender difference around female messaging, around being selfish and around being, agreeable and available and, always there for your family. I see a lot of that with the women that I work with. Is that true on your end too?
Absolutely. And I think it's why selfish has more potency than many of the other words, because it's this idea that you're a bad person if you don't take care of the people around you. I think it's ingrained from a very early age, especially with women, that we are the caretakers of the world, that we are meant to be serving to others. We are meant to make sure that we're a good wife, good partner, good girlfriend, good daughter, good mother, good colleague, good boss. But as long as you take care of everyone around you, you will be happy. When actually, a lot of the time, that will mean you're burnt out, you are filled with anger and resentment because you're having your boundaries crossed and you're not standing up for yourself. And I think this idea of even the flip side, selfless is seen as such a compliment to women, when actually it really shouldn't be, because why should we have to forget ourselves and put ourselves bottom of our list in order to feel like we're good enough for the rest of the world? And that's why it's so important to start evaluating whether you're good enough based off you and yourself and not what other people think. And actually having really good boundaries means saying, when someone calls you selfish, you going, you're allowed to think that. I don't actually need to change that opinion. That opinion can exist and it can also not be true.
Yeah, I think that's very beautifully said. This idea of letting other people have their own reaction to you, and that it's not, your job to manage all that, right? There's so many people that live, I think this is what you're saying, in that constant caretaker mode, the constant management mode, always living with their identity in the eyes of other people. Where when I see those people in my therapy office, and I'm sure when you see them in your life coaching office, they're just like you said, angry, resentful, burnt out, bitter, like kind of mean underneath it all, right? Because they've been suppressing all that aggression, that it just either turns inwards or just explodes in the worst possible moments.
I think it's quite ironic because it's seen as such a nice thing to do to put everyone else first, but actually those people are very rarely nice. They think they're nice, but actually, as
They're
you
never
said,
nice.
they're mean moments, because of course you would be if you
Yeah.
never do anything for yourself, if you never get to live your life for you, of course you'll be mean. When I didn't have good boundaries, I was the queen of, instead of boundaries, queen of passive aggressive comments. I would make so many digs, and then when I got called out on it, I'd be like, it's just a joke, why are you being so sensitive? That's a horrible way to be. And it's like they're not being sensitive. I was making a mean joke and I just didn't have the confidence in myself to say what I needed to say directly. And so I squeezed it out into a joke rather than standing behind my words and actually saying with my chest what I actually wanted to say. And so it's also about authenticity. And once you actually get good at saying what you mean and meaning what you say, that becomes a big part of boundary setting as well.
Yeah, and it builds up that internal self-esteem because now you're living in integrity. You know that you're not living a lie, you're not squashing parts of yourself, you're standing up for yourself.
And also then you're surrounded by people who actually like you for you rather than for what you can do, what they can do for what you can do for them. And I think a lot of the time when we're people pleasing, it's actually a little bit manipulative because you are changing who you are to get them to like you, regardless of who you actually are. And so actually, when I started losing lots of friends around setting boundaries, which again is a unglamorous side of self-love and self-care, is when you set boundaries, you will lose the people around you who expected you to be a pushover, who expected you to be a people pleaser. And actually, I got to the point in my life where I was a bit like, actually, it's kind of fair that they're leaving my life. They didn't agree to be friends with a boundaried woman. They agreed to be friends with a pushover. And I am so completely different from that person now that it totally makes sense that they don't want to be friends with me anymore. But I think it's having that confidence to know that it's going to pay off in the end. And when you when you get rid of anyone in your life, I truly believe that the people who fill that gap are people who are going to be better aligned to who you actually are now.
Yeah, so tell me about that process because I think it's a common theme in any recovery process, right? Whether it be from mental health, from body image, from shame, from addiction, whatever it is, there seems to be this shedding process, right? Where it's shedding community, shedding behavior, shedding habits. And there's a lot of grief and loss in that, but there's also a lot of power, which I hear you talking to. So what was your journey with setting these boundaries and starting to rediscover yourself?
Absolutely. So the first time you start setting boundaries, or even as you said, it could be body image, when you start changing, what initially happens is people will go more intense in a bid to try to convince you to not change. So they will call you the names, they will persuade you to go back on the diet, whatever it is, all the bad behaviors that you're trying to get away from, they will convince you and be more persistent in trying to get you to return back to your old ways because they like the old you. Once they realize you're not changing, that's when they'll leave your life. And that's when you can start doubting, well, if there are more than one people leaving my life at the same time, surely I'm the one in the wrong. And actually, it's not about wrong or right. It's about whether you're suited to each other. And it's important to remember, I think especially when it comes to friendships, there's so much shame around losing friends because there's so much time and space given to romantic breakups that we don't really talk about friendship loss. And it can hurt just as much. Yet if you told someone that you just lost your best friend of 7 years, you sound like a 13-year-old in a playground. Whereas if you said you broke up with your boyfriend of 7 years, you'd be met with so much sympathy. And so I think it's important that you validate the feelings that you have, but don't use that loss or that feeling of grief as confirmation that you made the wrong decision. Because you didn't. You can miss them. You can want them, the memories without wanting them back in your life. And you can also keep those memories without having them back in your life and recognizing that if it costs you losing people in your life, the cost of losing those people mean that you get to keep yourself, and you get to keep yourself with your integrity and your authenticity, and you will attract people who are actually similar to you now. And if you change in different directions, sometimes you can actually change back into the same direction, but don't hold on hope for that, because that can be more painful than just grieving the loss and moving on.
Yeah, I really, really resonate with what you're saying. Of as you get healthier, you attract healthier people. You kind of sync up in the same vibration, for lack of a better term, right? All of a sudden, the people that seemed out of reach, or maybe just seemed kind of boring, or you would just look over, it's like, oh wait, no, this person has something going on.
Absolutely. And I also think so with having lack of boundaries, it meant I attracted a lot of people who took advantage of it. But on the flip side, I also attracted, because my life was a bit of a mess and I was going through PTSD and all of those things, I attracted a lot of people who had savior complexes, where the dynamic depended on me being the mess. I was in friendship groups where the joke was Michelle is a mess. So I can't really evolve or grow in any way. And I can't really be the life coach that I wanted to be if the running joke. And I think we have this narrative around jokes of being like, oh, well, you're too sensitive. As I said before, I was guilty of it too. I said it as well. And I think we need to be very careful about the jokes we're making about ourselves, because I think our brain is listening and our brain doesn't know it's a joke.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Tell me more about that dynamic, because I think that happens, right? Where you have people saying, oh, Michelle's a mess, but we love her anyway, or she's part of their group. And I can only imagine that you must have felt some level of unconditional love through that. But it's a little bit darker, right? It's also pigeonholing you into that role of being the hot mess, of being the one that people have to take care of.
Well, I think it's a self-esteem thing where at least I might be the mess of the group, but at least I'm in the group. And if that purpose I have to serve within the group, if that's the role I have to play in order to be accepted, in order to be like, I'll play that role, because I'd rather have a role than be in the back and have no friends in school, whatever it is. And so I think that's what inevitably happens. But even if they're not doing it consciously, when you're making fun of a certain person, so it's not necessarily saying someone's a mess, it could be the person in your friendship group who you say their love life is specifically a mess. So it's not like every area of their life, but they're the person who can't get their love life together. It is a one-upmanship where you're trying to put someone down. And again, I don't think it's always done maliciously or intentionally even, but when you're feeling better about yourself because you're not the person who everyone's calling a mess, or you're feeling better about yourself because, oh, at least my love life isn't as bad as insert random person that you make fun of, then you have that moment of relief about your own insecurity. And I think it's important to start building these friendship groups where the bonding isn't happening over unkind or mean jokes. Instead, finding yourself a friendship group where when someone makes a joke like that about anyone, not even necessarily about you, you go, hey, don't do that, that was mean. Or, hey, we're better than that. Let's find a better conversation topic than to be bonding over how awful or how wrong or I told you so. All of these things that become, oh, well, I'm just being a good friend. When actually you're not. If it makes me feel bad, you're not being a good friend.
Yeah, those are some great examples of boundaries.
Yeah.
Right? I'm curious, what are some other ones that our listeners should look out for, maybe specifically in friend groups or in relationships, and things that they should be, kind of those big red no lines that they should make sure that are not being crossed?
So I think one of my favorite ones at the moment is do not speak to me in that way. I just think it's always going to be one of my favorites because it's one of the first ones I learned. And it didn't occur to me you could say that to someone until my life coach told me to say that to someone. And I was like, you can't say that. She was like, why can't you say that? I was like, I don't know, I've just never thought to say that. And so if someone's swearing at you, don't speak to me like that. If someone's raising their voice, I also think boundaries are very personal. So boundaries aren't one size fits all. But for example, one of my strongest boundaries is body shaming. So if a friend comments on what I eat, if a friend comments on what I'm wearing, all of these things, I don't want comments on my body, my business. And I will say, please stop talking about my body. Let's talk about something more interesting. If they persist, I will say, if you're going to keep talking about my body, then I'm going to go into the other room and you can come find me when you want to talk about something else. And I'm very clear and distinct around that, especially around friendships and relationships as well. I think it's important to have good time boundaries. So when people I used to have a lot of friends who used to turn up 2 hours late and I would still be waiting there. Nowadays,
Oh, yeah, I hate that.
Absolutely hate that, because time is it's a cliche, but time is my most precious commodity. I don't like my time being wasted. I hate those people who walk around telling you how busy they are, but I am busy, and I don't want my time wasted, and I have better things to do than sit and wait. And so I will wait for people for up to 20 minutes, especially across London. If you're late, it's quite hard to be like 2 minutes late, or usually 20 minutes late. Anything past that, I'll be like, hey, let's go for lunch another day. I'm leaving. And I will actually leave. No one forced me to sit there and wait for 2 hours. And so it's about taking accountability of your stuff too.
Yeah, I think that's really wise, right? The boundary has to be internal as well as external. And being like, I'm not going to live in this world anymore. I'm not going to choose to suffer and sit there for 2 hours in anxiety or in shame, right? Of like, this person doesn't like me. Where are they? What happened to them? Am I not worth it? Like, you have control over that. Like you said, you can remove yourself from the situation and do something that you love.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious more around this boundary thing. What's the hardest boundary you've ever had to set? What was the one that took, all the planning, all the courage, all the strength to get out there?
Definitely family boundaries. You could set boundaries with your family. But to be fair, in all areas of my life, I didn't know you could set boundaries. But I think the problem with family is that it's your longest relationships, your most ingrained patterns, and there is a unsaid and sometimes said narrative of it is how it's always been, and you shouldn't rock the boat. And so having to set boundaries, especially in a culture which you don't speak to your parents like that, meant that I got a lot of reactions from people who just didn't like the new me. And so it was about being persistent with it, and also being firm in your boundaries, and knowing that what I was doing and what I was saying was being polite, was being compassionate. And so even if you call me rude, even if you call me mean, I know for a fact it's not true, because I've actually chosen each word deliberately.
Yeah. I like that. What's your strategy for that? Like, do you write it down? Do you practice with your life coach? Do you rehearse? How do you make sure that the boundary comes out clear and direct?
I think the main thing for me is to be able to process the emotions separately. So I'll never do it in the heat of the moment. I think sometimes we feel the pressure to do it in the heat of the moment because you feel like you'll miss your chance, when actually there's no time limit on boundaries. You can say something like, hey, that conversation we had a week ago, it didn't really sit right with me, and can we talk about it? And you're basically opening up a conversation that happened a week ago. You can do it a month later. You can even bring it up years later and say, hey, I know we've had this dynamic so far. I'm changing it right now. And so in order to process your emotions, I think you need to remove any anger or resentment you're feeling. You need to be able to separate what's actually coming from your past and what's coming from the situation in front of you. And so therefore I go into each conversation emotionally neutral.
I think that's great. I think that is the value of having a life coach or a therapist or a confidant, where you can vent, right? You can vent out all the emotions so that when you're with the person, you can be very assertive and clear and direct about the boundaries. So we're going to move into our next commercial break now. When we come back, we like to give something to the audience. So we'll talk about, strategies for being more selfish, right? Or how to set boundaries, or anything that you'd like to give from the book or from your coaching practice for someone that's listening that resonates with your story. So for those of you listening, thanks for tuning in. And if you like this episode, please share it on social media, send to someone who you think might benefit from it. We all can use more boundaries out there.